This is the first of 3 in a webinar series on infrastructure development on the continent in partnership with AfCFTA. We're going to have the next webinar, so we have this one today, and there's going to be another one coming up on the 15th of July, so that's 2 weeks' time. Do mark that in your calendar so you can continue this series. And that one will have the title, Infrastructure is the African Private Sector, the Missing Dot. That's a good way to continue the conversation that we're going to be having this afternoon. Now, if you're able to tweet, and I'll say that because as many of you know, in Nigeria, we do have those restrictions in place, but wherever you are, if you're able to tweet, please use the Twitter handle, #ACFDigitalEvents. We want to keep this session as interactive as possible. We'll be looking at your tweets and looking at your questions as we go along. So I'd like to say welcome to you once again. We do have new people coming on, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to kick things off. Just to say a few points really at the very start of this. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is set to be a game changer for the African continent. It came into effect in January this year. The successful implementation of the AfCFTA is expected to have a significant effect on intra-African trade, estimated to increase by over 50% in 2022 when you compare that with trade levels in 2010. However, Africa's infrastructure deficit could threaten this path as infrastructure development is required to kickstart intra-regional trade. As you know, Africa has a pressing infrastructure need. Africa's current pipeline of infrastructure project is set to be worth $2.5 trillion, yet only about 10% of these are likely to reach financial close because of low technical capabilities and an equal allocation of resources throughout the funding project cycle, amongst other issues, as you know. So in a nutshell, inadequate skills, financing, but there's also short political cycles and the uncertainties that go with that, an unfavorable infrastructure policy framework, all of which challenge commitments from investors to long-term infrastructure projects. But now that we have the newly implemented free trade agreement, we're asking today, could it be that a more efficient infrastructure funding project cycle will emerge? In this session today, we will be hearing from, those are the, as you can see, your live tweets. Do tweet ACF Digital Events. Now in this session, we'll be hearing from business builders and inspiring leaders structured around a series of presentations, speeches, and panel discussions focused around 3 key points. I'm just going to run through those 3 key points very quickly. We're asking, does the AfCFTA have the potential to improve infrastructure projects by making them more attractive to investors? How can infrastructure development and logistics participate in e-economy growth? And how does the free trade area or agreement help overcome obstacles for regional infrastructure funding? All right, so let me just make sure everything is here. Everyone's here, fine. So to kick things off, we're going to start today with a presentation from our expert, Adedoyin Amosun. She's Associate Director at PwC Nigeria. Adedoyin has extensive experience across various industries, including financial services, manufacturing, and logistics, delivering value-added solutions in relation to cost optimization, procurement, supply chain, digital, and finance transformation. So she knows her stuff. Adedoyin, over to you now.
Thank you, Didi, for that warm welcome and lovely introduction. I appreciate the privilege provided by the Africa CEO Forum for me to share my perspective on the theme, African Continental Free Trade Area, the Age of Infrastructure. And because the acronym can be a bit of a tongue twister, I'll just call it the African Free Trade Area. The Africa Free Trade Area is really the beginning of a journey to achieving the age-long objective for the integration of the African continent. And really the broad objective of the African Free Trade Area really is to create a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business and persons and investments really. And this will pave the way for the creation of the Continental Customs Union and the overall objective really of the economic integration and the prosperity of the African continent. To date, 54 countries have signed the consolidated text of the agreement establishing the Africa Free Trade Area. 39 have complied with their domestic requirements for ratification of the agreement. About 36 countries have deposited their instruments of ratification with the depository. And that's a chair of the African Union Commission. With a combined GDP of about 3.4 trillion and 1.3 billion people across member countries, the World Bank estimates that the African trade area has a potential to lift over 30 million Africans from extreme poverty. While it may seem like progress in establishing and operationalizing the agreement is slow, let's bear in mind that at least 2 of the EU countries, specifically Bulgaria and Romania, joined the EU more than 5 decades after the Common Trade Agreement was mooted. Now, moving on to the next slide. Africa requires up to $170 million annually, $170 million annually to fund its infrastructure needs. And there is an annual infrastructure funding gap of about 68 to $180 million. Now, going on to talk about the trends we find in infrastructure. I'll talk about the first one, which I call Infra Tech, which is really the merger of digital technologies with physical infrastructure to deliver efficiency, resilience in various areas. And examples include transport. You have your digital train signaling, you have your drones, you have your electric vehicles. Then in the power sector, we're looking at smart metering and the renewables. In telecoms, we're looking at 5G, we're looking at wireless, and we're looking at fiber and broadband. I'll now talk about the operational resilience trend. We find that the disruption to on-site staff operations has resulted in an acceleration in new types of project workflows, such as modular and offsite production. Taking construction offsite creates opportunities for more streamlined ways of working, standardization in design, automated production techniques that leverage technologies such as advanced robotics. Some proponents indicate that modular construction is actually faster, safer, and more efficient than on-site building and assembly. And we find that studies have shown that modular building takes up to 80% of the construction building from the actual site location. Now, talking about sustainability, there's a global shift from brown to green economy. And the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, that's its SDGs, are supporting this transition actively. The finance cost of meeting the SDGs has been estimated to be about 5 to 7 trillion annually, right through to 2030. But about half of this will be going to developing countries, quite a number of which are in Africa. We find that the Climate Bonds Initiative has estimated that the total issuance of green bonds, which are debt instruments designed to raise capital specifically for environmentally friendly projects, hit about $250 billion in 2019, up from about $3.5 billion in 2012. I'll now talk about the developments in financing. Some money is available in the form of grants, concession loans, and the like. But in terms of getting infrastructure development underway, we know that governments alone cannot finance the needs. In developing countries in particular, the multilateral development institutions are actively seeking to tap into private capital through mechanisms such as blended finance. Well, despite these ongoing efforts, not enough of a potential investment is finding its way to developing countries. The World Bank has indicated that pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, mutual funds, and other institutional investors make up to only about 1%, actually less than 1% of total global investments in developing nations. This low investment level is predominantly due to the perceived risk from political instability, well, the ability of users, and the degree to which earnings can be repatriated. Of course, rule of law continues to be a key issue. Moving on to the next slide. Infrastructure is critical to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are familiar with the infrastructure challenges that constrain economic growth in Africa. And there are quite a few. So for instance, we have household electrification rates standing at 43%. So effectively less than half of Africans have access to electric power. The power demand is expected to increase by about 93% from this year to 2030. A lot more than double what you find in other industrialized countries. Now, going on to transportation, at least 80% of goods and passengers are transported by road. And this poses a big challenge because more than half of African roads are not paved. And the effect of this really is that our road tariffs are more than double what you'll find in other climes. Of course, there are delays in transporting goods from place to place. And at the end of the day, economic growth is stunted. As I move on to the next slide, it's not all a tale of gloom, because with a market with access to 1.3 billion people, the Africa Free Trade Area will give rise to digital startups. A recent check on the startup lists estimates that about 125 e-commerce companies have raised $1.9 billion in funding. And we know that with this, whether or not the infrastructure challenges are fixed, we know that there will be opportunity for investors to invest in creating transportation links and road infrastructure that will boost trade. Of course, there is targeted foreign investment, and it will unlock a lot more opportunity for more of such investments to come into Africa. There will be increased demand for technology, and we've seen that in terms of the digital innovations that we've seen among the startups. And of course, there will be a creation of a competitive e-commerce logistics market, and we've found quite a number of people playing in this area. So we have Kobo 360, we have Lorry, you have Amit Trucks. So while there are a number of challenges, we know there are significant opportunities for Africa to rise above the challenges of poverty and bridge that gap and make the best of this market of 1.3 billion people with a GDP that is just waiting to grow. So I'll now just hand over to the eminent panelists who will now talk to us and discuss the ways in which we can make the best of the opportunities in this area. Over to you, Didi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adido. And just interesting point I just pulled from that presentation, which we can keep in mind. The African Continental Free Trade Area has potential to jumpstart the entire logistics sector. All right, so I think that we will definitely now be moving on to our first poll of the day. The aim, ladies and gentlemen, is to keep this session as interactive as possible. I'm sure you can see that poll is already popped up. So, you know, we're asking two poll questions, taking 2 polls today, and just, you know, kindly just, you know, select one. You can see there the first is in your opinion, which sector will benefit the most from the African continental free trade area? Transportation, logistics, energy, airport, telecommunications, or other. And your questions have started to come in, and I am taking a look at those. And during the course of the webinar, I will be picking up 1 or 2 of those questions. Right, so I hope you're all taking part in that polling that we have up there. After the first key point, I shall bring up the results of the poll, but for now, let's move on to the first key point of the day. We would like to know if truly the African continental free trade area has the potential to boost infrastructure projects by making them more attractive to investors. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have with us today Portia Derby, is Chief Executive at Transnet Group. Hello, Portia. She has occupied senior positions in the South African government during a period of major economic reform. Dimita Yang is Senior Advisor to the Secretary General at the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. She's also currently Head of Customs Corporation, Trade Facilitation and Transit. And hello, Dimita. We also have Obi Ozo, the CEO of Kobo 360. Adedoye mentioned Kobo 360 in her presentation there. Obi has over 6 years of logistics and supply chain experience and manages all aspects of Kobo 360 from operations to product growth. So as you can see from the panel, we're very much focused on the transport and logistics side of things. And we also have Dimita from the AfCFTA as well. So we'll have very interesting perspectives from all of our panelists. Welcome to all of you, first of all. I'd like to start really and get right into it. You know, it is clear that the most critical factor for the successful implementation of the free trade agreement will be infrastructure. And you know, everyone says this. We know that we need to scale up investment and improve connections between African countries so the goods and services can access markets. Dimita, I'll start with you. Now that we have this free trade agreement in place, and despite the fact that it will take some time to implement, do you think that we'll start to see more interest in investors, in infrastructure projects on the continent, and particularly projects that will ease implementation? Dimita. Oh, Dimita, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. It's always happening.
Always happening.
Okay, yeah. So thank you very much, Didi. And I also was thanking the presenter for the perspectives that she shared. Oh, yes. From my perspective, as one who was also part of the negotiations of the AfCFTA, is that what the AfCFTA has done is make Africa a bride that should actually be courted. Would the AfCFTA bring in investment? Would it lead to the needed infrastructure? The answer is yes, but a lot of advocacy needs to be done together with just presenting the agreement. And when you look at the agreement, what the agreement has done is actually address some of the issues why there is no infrastructure before now. It's not a chicken and egg thing. You know, what the agreement has actually done is to address some of those issues. And it is hoped that with the agreement and the ecosystem in the agreement, addressing some of these issues, the needed investments will come. Investors will see that this is right, and then there will be profit for them if they do invest within the continent, especially in infrastructure. Let me break down what I mean. So the agreement is not a traditional FTA. It's not like your usual FTA, trading goods, trading services. It's a lot more than that. because it went beyond trade in goods and trade in services. It's looking at cooperation in terms of investment. So there will be an investment protocol. It is looking at competition. It is looking at intellectual property. And then it has gone beyond that. And now it is looking at women and youth in trade. And it's looking at digital trade. So it's not your traditional, it's a comprehensive agreement. It goes beyond just goods moving. It has supported goods moving with what goods need to move with. All right. So, and then when you go also into some of the provisions of the agreement, for instance, if you look at the market access that is being provided, you are looking at having goods move without duty in the continent for 97% of our tariff lines. By the year 2033, since implementation started 2021. So by the year 2023, 13 years down the road, because that's what the modalities say, you would have liberalized at least 97% of the entire tariff lines. But this is not just alone. It is accompanied by elimination of non-tariff barriers. So the hope is that non-tariff barriers will be eliminated within the continent. And if you go through studies, by the time you eliminate non-tariff barriers, you could actually increase trade by up to 52%, right? So when you look at that, and then you also have the rules of origin. This is key to really bring in investments, because the kind of rules of origin that have been crafted means that really, if you want to be part of this market, if you want to be part of this preference, you have to bring the investments in. You have to locate in Africa. So that attraction is there. You have to locate in Africa, because the way the rules of origin have been crafted, especially for the fact that it is cumulative being that you can bring in your components from all parts of Africa, make it in another part of Africa, and it qualifies as originating. Now, an investor that is seeking to make profit, what it simply means is that you can bring that investment in one part of Africa, and you have the entire market for your at your beck and call, right? So when you look at the rules of origin, when you look at what the ecosystem of the AfCFTA offers, it has really made Africa a bride for investment. Now, let me make this point before the fact that some of the rules calls for harmonization of legislations, harmonization of rules and procedures, our national ways of doing things. It addresses one of the key issues that investors talk about, because they talk about multiple legislations that they have to meet. But with where the AfCFTA is taking us to, with the harmonization of things like customs procedures, for instance, they will be harmonized, and then other rules and procedures that the agreement stipulates that they should be harmonized. When you do that, you would have tackled one key point that investors actually do have problems with. Thank you, Didi.
Right there. I mean, Demetra pointed it out. Africa's infrastructure challenges are not just about funding, and many people actually argue that funding and the large pipeline of projects has always been here. And while the free trade agreement offers a significant opportunity for investors, we've never really lacked when it comes to opportunities in Africa. And as you said, there are other issues. There's political risk, currency, inadequate skills, and then other factors to consider, like you mentioned, rules of origin, multiple legislations, multiple currencies. I'd like to bring Portia in just to get your perspective on this. Really pretty much the same point, really. Is the free trade area significant enough to boost infrastructure projects on the continent? Where do you stand on this?
Good afternoon, and afternoon to all of the people on the webinars. Thank you for giving us your time. I'm hopeful and not all at the same time, because so let me preface it on, when I look at some of the demands that we are placing as Africans on the type of infrastructure that we should have, and the standards that we are setting, I think we are setting ourselves up for failure. So I'll use, for example, the decision that we've made on the continent that we want to go to standard gauge For example, when on the rail system, when most of us hardly have rail infrastructure, and when we do, we often have one or two lines. They bifurcate our countries either into north, south, or if you're lucky, east, west. And if you're really, really lucky, it might generate 4 corners. So we haven't reached, it's not extensive. It's not extensive, and it is a very expensive infrastructure today. And we do a comparison of ourselves as a continent relative to the Europeans who've been developing infrastructure and rail for many years, and also have the advantage of have had that zone for a long time, where there are cross subsidies and all kinds of subsidies that the governments are able to give to enable the infrastructure to develop. Our case, we've got to look at rail, you've got to look at road, and you also got to look at our port systems. Now, fortunately, continentally, if we were to say that a core portion of our trade is by shipping. So there are interesting opportunities, which I think as Africans, we haven't taken enough thought of around how do we run milk runs intra-regionally. So I may hope that it would lead to increased trade. But I must say, often I think it's not so much the fact that there isn't a tarred road, because a dirt road will do if you look after the dirt road. And if it gets volumes, that volume and that growth will lead to the improvement in the road. It's a matter of fact. It's the fact that when you get to the border between all of us, and let's forgive ourselves, we're not manufacturing economies. So if I'm waiting for avocados or bananas or whatever it is that's coming from some other country north of me to arrive in South Africa, I can't afford that at each and every single one of our border posts, we are dealing with phytosanitary requirements. It takes 3-4 days. So you got to consider the fact, if it's taking 3-4 days for it to pass one border post to the other border post, I mean, that makes it difficult. So I'm not so sure, Didi, if it's hard physical infrastructure like roads that is really the constraint. I actually think we often ignore the more serious limitations for trade, like what are the rules, what are the phytosanitary requirements, do I have a cold chain, because it is what it is. We are not value adders at this stage. Even if we eventually will trade, 15% of our trade, according to the briefing that we've received, is manufacturing. So we must anticipate that our trade is going to start off from basic agricultural products, or it's going to be mining commodities. And let's be honest, most of the mining leaves all of us, because we all don't have metals processing and the rest of the like. We don't have enough electricity, so that leaves most of the continent. So to my mind, the priority has definitely got to be, how do we improve those very same dirt roads that we have? And how do we make sure that at border posts, we have priority crossing and we minimize the rules that stop the flow of the goods that we are able to trade today as Africans without getting value add from some other foreign partner. So I'm hopeful. On the one hand, I think if we make the right moves, but I'm also quite anxious on the other side, because if we continue to adopt standards which make sure that we invariably put ourselves into the pockets of foreign investors buying really expensive infrastructure we can't afford, I think we would have traded our continent down the line, and we won't get the benefits that we're supposed to be seeing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Portia. Really, a very good point, interesting points there. And Obi, I'd like to bring you in also, to sort of follow on from what Portia says, because I think that you also have a lot to share on that point that Portia made on the issues of the borders and the fact that, even if we do have the infrastructure, we still would not begin to scratch the surface of the issues. And, just based on the work that you do at Cobble 360, working with cargo owners and trying to get that cargo from its owners to receivers. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that from your perspective.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. I love what Adoni have done, Demeter and Portia. I think one person from the Q&A mentioned, why is it that in Africa, we always talk about hypothetical solutions and we don't actually address the how, right? So that people actually go away with something. So I'm going to change my approach and focus on what can be done. So we have a good understanding of what is going on in supply chain and trade and commerce in Africa. Most of them run on our platform. At least about 2,400 trailer loads, food trailer loads, every single day go through our platform. Almost close to 60,000 of those every month. So we do understand what is going on in the continent. I don't think that the biggest problem we have to implement AfCFTA is actually building up roads or rails, any of those.
I think we may have lost Obi slightly. We'll give him a few minutes because I think it's just frozen. Can everybody else hear me? So it's not just me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Obi, I can hear you. Yeah.
Obi was about to make such an, giving us a very, very good perspective, obviously from his personal experience. And as he says, we need to stop talking about these issues and start to look more into solutions. And when we come into these sessions, perhaps we can actually have those solutions. I will bring him back up when he comes on to, and probably add a little more time just so that we can hear that from him. And I'm sure the organizers are trying to get him back on. But there's something I actually want to talk about as well. And I think Dimitar must, mention this at the very start, this, case of the chicken, or the egg. The fact is infrastructure development is needed before the successful implementation of the free trade area. Yes, there are other things that come with that. And, there are other different factors and other challenges that, that are necessary. But at the same time, infrastructure is definitely key. But one thing to point out is, are we optimistically, is it optimistic to expect investors to divert funds to us? I mean, from the presentation that Adedoyin gave at the start, she was talking about how 60% of global infrastructure spend between 2019 and 2040 will be in Asia. So I'm just wondering if this free trade area will be enough of a game changer when it comes to competition from investments. I think that I'll ask that question to Dimitar. And then once you're done with that, then we'll be back on.
Yeah, okay. Adedoyin in her presentation pointed out very key things. What has happened with the AfCFTA is that instead of the fragmented markets that you had before now, instead of the small markets, market of 1 million, market of 2 million, except for the heavily populated ones, what you now have is a market size of 1.3 billion people. So that in itself alone is enough for an investor to want to invest. 1.3 billion markets, that's one. Talk about the GDP, and then the GDP gives you an idea about the buying power. You have a growing middle class in Africa, that do have a buying power. So when you talk about that, when you look at the GDP of a 3.4 trillion, and with successful implementation of the AfCFTA, the World Bank projects that it could add $450 billion to the GDP. All right. So, to the GDP. Yeah. So, So, and then the agreement in itself, when implemented, would help close gender parity, the gap. It will benefit women and youth. And then when you look at the population of Africa, by 2050, we'll have about 70% youth population. So when you look at the figures and the numbers, you could say yes, the AfCFTA would definitely attract. Already, there is conversation and there is heavy advocacy. They are coming. They are asking, where do we come in? How do we collaborate with you in this? The world recognizes this. The world recognizes what Africa has done for itself by having this rules-based system. It's a rules-based system. So finally, we have tackled the rules. The rule is a rules-based system within which we can trade, right? So in that agreement is your rights, your obligations, what you should do in terms of SPS requirement, what the government that you're sending your products to, what they owe you because you have done these things. It's about rights and obligations, and it's about balanced rights and obligations, addressing those very things that ordinarily had made us not competitive. So actually, the AfCFTA, one of the things it will do is that it will make Africa more competitive. And if Africa is more competitive, then I believe.
I think what's quite interesting about our panelists is, we have Demeter, who's obviously, pretty much very optimistic about the free trade area. And then we have Portia, so it's somewhat optimistic. And then Obi, I thought perhaps you were going to bring in a more maybe not so optimistic perspective, but I know you want to focus on solutions. So let's hear from you.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped off for a minute. So I think what will be interesting is this is not the first time Africa have come up with good ideas. We have different regional pacts, ECOWAS. It just didn't work. So for me, what I'm more interested in is not about setting up gigantic trade blocks and the ideas that will never come true. I think what is interesting is what can we do that we don't need other people? Can we even just say phase one is next 5 years about policies? Like I said, let everybody just forget about infrastructure, right? The policies will bring the infrastructure investment, right? And then, for example, now if today we're able to quickly move across borders, right? It actually makes it easy to have data that any investor that you want to do road infrastructure, rail, or anything can actually invest based on, right? So I think that the critical thing today is let us not make this thing the same way our governments are bureaucratic and gigantic stuff. Let us focus on what are some of those small things. Maybe even revisit this thing in regional ways. I actually think that is the best way it can work. Can even West Africa work? Can they actually handle their own side? And Nigeria is not even trading with its neighbor today, right? I don't even know how we can be talking about Africa considered, and Nigeria is still almost locked up, right? How do we even achieve this thing regionally? And then you start talking Pan-Africa, and it's just few policies. Today, it takes like 3 weeks to move from Nigeria to Accra. If actually moving goods. In every small country, any place, you're stopping there for almost 4 or 5 days, right? The policies are there. That's actually the thing. We are very good at having policies. Those policies are there. There are just no incentive for people to follow them because of corruption. I think there's a mistake all of us are making. The policies are there. Nigeria and all their neighbors have all these clear policies, but people don't actually, the people who are in charge of this don't want it to work, right? And there's no way to report. That's also the problem. So you can actually complain. There's no complaining process. Like you can't complain. I don't know how to let Demeter know what is going on actually, right? So, and I think I'm one of the people that can actually tell them what is going on, right? Because I'm one of the users, but there's no way to tell them. So they will keep talking about policies from their angle. We keep going through what we're going through. And then at the end of the day, everybody gives up on it, which is why nothing works. We still haven't closed the ECOWAS. Maybe since it's not working and there's AfCFTA, we should actually close it, because he didn't achieve his aim. But everybody just gives up and we move on, and next time we'll come up with something. So I think the critical thing is, let us take this thing in chunks. Let us do policy, things that in regional basis. In next 2-3 years, we'll be able to achieve that. With that, you will have a lot of innovation come up. Things will start happening. Everybody believes again, and we go to another phase. I think the last phase can actually be infrastructure, because then you don't need to convince anybody, because they can already see that things are working in phase 1 and phase 2. And then there needs to be a way for the policymakers like Demeter to actually connect with the actual users. If today Olam, let's say Olam wants to be moving things across different, Olam is regional, like almost Pan-Africa in terms of agriculture. If they're struggling, there's no way for them to actually get to the people that are doing content. They're actually one of the users that can benefit from continental free trade today. But there is absolutely no way. So everybody just gives up. So I think there needs to be that engagement, right, with the policymakers and the users. This we can already do, and it's not difficult, so that they can actually know how can we start small to implement this. There needs to be a regional approach instead of taking this continental thing that is just difficult to achieve. Then technology. What are some of those things we can do with technology that doesn't actually require infrastructure?
Yeah,
Today,
I'm going to move on to that. Yeah. I'm going to move on to that point, because our second key point touches more on the digital side. I think that's an interesting point that you're trying to bring out. I actually wish I could put Obi and Demeter in a room because and then we have Porsche, who is like sort of somewhat optimistic, which makes it very interesting. And how and I would have liked to have Demeter say something back, but I think that we kind of have to move on. We don't have unfortunately we only have an hour and 15 minutes for this session. I mean, you can of course touch on some of the things he's saying, in the next key point as well. But for now, we have the results of the poll. I think the organizers are going to put that up. Let's see. In your opinion, which sector will benefit the most from the AfCFTA? Logistics. Interesting. And then next up, we have transportation, and then telecommunications, energy, airports. Interesting. Thanks so much for that. I mean, there will be another poll coming up later on. But I must say this to the audience. I think you're very interactive and we love that. But right now, please keep your questions to the actual Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, just next to raise hand. A lot of you are chatting in the chat box, and it's quite difficult to be able to look at the two. And I want to be able to ask your questions and look in one place, right? So please, chat can be hello and all that, but for the questions, leave it to the Q&A. Okay, now, moving on, let's see where we are. All right, so we've had the results of the poll. Now, we hope to have 2 guest speakers today. Unfortunately, we're only going to be having 1 today because last minute cancellation from Tawaldi Gebremariam, the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines. As you know, these things do happen, when you're running a leading airline, anything can happen. So hopefully we would be able to catch up with him at some other time. It would have been great to have his perspective, but we still have our second guest speaker coming up. Right now, I believe that we're going to move on to the second key point of the day. We still have all our panelists on, and Obi was about to touch on that, so I might let you continue, but that key point talks about digitization. We know that digitization is one of the trends driving the global infrastructure investment opportunity, so it's important to touch on Africa's digital economy. Obi, I'll let you continue just because you've built this digital logistics platform connecting cargo owners, drivers, and cargo receivers. So perhaps you could share from your experience what significant infrastructure development could mean for the growth of the digital economy, or would you say that in some way the digital economy is somewhat shielded from the infrastructure paradox?
Yeah, so I think one of the good things that have happened in the continent is actually the digital movement, to be honest. That's one of the positive things going on in our continent, right? And I think we should double down on it, right? I think we should double down on it. And we're seeing certain support from the government in different areas, especially in the financial services, right? One of our financial services is actually one of the most advanced in the world today. We skipped a lot of different stages in financial services. So I think that focusing on that, it will be very, very critical. I think the infrastructure, people have a bias for Africa. People have bias. And we can't force money out from people. What we need to do is do the little we can. We have youthful population. We have very interesting now up and coming technology ecosystem in different parts of Africa today. How do we just make basic policies that be able to use that as an engine of innovation? Right? And that engine of innovation can still solve 40% of the trade issues we have today in Africa. And then later on, you're able to now use some of those data, right, to move into the infrastructure where people actually know what they are exactly getting involved in. So for me, I think that a critical part of this continental free trade is investment in digital, right? How can the government leave this infrastructure focus? Like everybody thinking AfCFTA, is just thinking about it. Look at even the subject of our discussion is so much on infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is a dream. It's going to take time to come. It's going to take time to come, right? because there's corruption. Even if somebody gives us money today to do infrastructure, are we even going to do the infrastructure? Right? So it's going to take time. So I think there is also needs to be some focus on digital innovation. What can digital do for us? Because that is what we can control today in the continent. If we can use digital to solve some of these problems, it makes it easier to, of course, wait on government that have not worked for decades, right? And we pray that this will be figured out in 10 years.
All right, Portia, I'd like to bring you in. Of course, we're talking about, the significant growth we've seen in Africa's digital economy. And many would say that this has happened in spite of infrastructure challenges, and that growth is expected to continue its exponential growth trend. And when you take a look at what's happened in the last 18 months, with the pandemic triggering a digital boom in sub-Saharan Africa alongside the rest of the world, what would you say about that link between the digital economy and infrastructure? Is the digital economy somewhat shielded from what we're talking about today, all the challenges that we're highlighting today?
I have to say, Obi lives in the world in the bubble that I occupy. So I'm 100% aligned with the things that he's saying. So let's go back to the point. The AfCFTA intends to drive trade on the continent that we fund, and that we, as Africans, are able to retain the value and invest in all of our countries and wherever it might be. Now, the one point that he makes, which I think we shouldn't lose sight of, is the time that he says it takes between Accra and Nigeria. What did he say? He said, I wrote it down, 3 weeks. Now, I did once, by the way, drive from Togo through Benin to Lagos, because we were trying to figure out how long and how difficult the route would be. There was actually no problem whatsoever with the infrastructure. None. The issues were tied to literally the point that Obi is raising, which is, if you want to be able to have trade, you need efficient processes first and foremost. You can't go and throw a road and think that the road or the railway line is going to solve the problem for you. It doesn't. You put in, it's a white elephant. If you haven't sorted out how you're going to ensure that transport, locals, trucks, whatever it is that you're building is going to be able to move fast from one end to the other, because all consumers are the same, right? No matter, just because we're Africans doesn't mean to say that we don't want to get quality goods at the end of the day. So for me, some of the points that he says are absolutely aligned. Some data indicates that around 2012, 79 million of us had smartphones on the continent. And they expect, and I'm just, quoting other people's numbers, these are not my numbers, is that in 2018, we would be at 412 million smartphones. Now, if you did over and above the little thing that Ovi is asking for, can we just ask for the same things? Can we ask for the same information? Can we standardize on what quality is, the definitions of things? Because if we standardized at that, border crossings and border movements become a lot easier. There's one at some point, and also I just think it's underrepresented. The amount of interregional trade that women do across borders is not counted, never is counted. It's not on a railway line, So all I'm saying is that I'm not, so that I'm not gotten wrong. I really do think it's the only way to go as a continent if we're going to be able to get beyond the 15% interregional trade to some sensible number, which everybody benefits from trading with each other. But I do think that if we hang the argument on build the infrastructure first and then the trade will happen, I think we'll miss the point. The issue, you could even have another session, frankly, is look at the very fact that you start off with a statement that says, the lady from PwC that says that there's a gap, and it doesn't matter what the size is. There's a gap of about 100 billion US dollars for infrastructure investment it's telling you something, right? We don't have that money. So as far as I'm concerned, maybe we should do a little bit more about what Obi is saying, is let's make it a lot more efficient to use the modes that we currently have today. And then as you grow, because growth gives you the capital at the end of the day, in any event, it gives you a little bit more of an equity check, so that when you're talking to Chinese investors, European investors, whoever investor that's there, you have a little bit of money as a country to be able to put down for your share so that you can have some control over that infrastructure. So I couldn't support him more, because there are these other things that we don't talk about, which actually are the real life around just how difficult it is to cross one border to the next border. Is that phytosanitary rules, easier documentation that was easy to understand, and we use the phones and the devices that we have so that we can actually start having better data between all of us. And yeah, sure, if the data is there, maybe the private investors will invest because they see that there are volumes in those corridors.
Great, Portia. Right.
I wanted to add something.
I would like to respond to these issues, if you don't mind, because they need to be responded to.
Yeah. I'd like Demeter to respond first, Obi, and then and then you can come in, because right now it's Team Portia and Obi.
And Team Obi versus Team Demeter.
Versus Team Demeter, and Demeter, I'd like you to give us your perspective, change their minds if you can. And
I will sure try.
Yes, and also while you're doing that, tell us what the implementation of the free trade area will mean for Africa's digital economy. That's the key points that we're focusing on. Yeah.
So let me say first, you can't delink trade from infrastructure. You cannot say let's figure out how to trade, then we build the infrastructure. The infrastructure enables you to trade. So it's not something you can delink. They are interlinked like that, right? Because for me to move my goods from one point to the other, I need the infrastructure. My trucks are not going to drive in the bush if there is no road, right? Okay, so I need even digital activities. It's based on infrastructure, as if we are narrowing the definition of infrastructure. Don't you need fiber optics? Don't you need connectivity? Don't you need all those masks that make sure that when you use your mobile phone, you are able to connect to the next person? So all these are infrastructure, right? It's not, when we talk infrastructure, and when we are talking infrastructure, one thing I need to correct here, I'm talking investment. We're not talking purely investment like Chinese people come in, and we are actually driving towards having Africa finance themselves. And if you go by, some of the things that have happened, Afreximbank has put down a lot of money for this. So we're actually not talking about just other people's money. We're also talking about Africa's money, financing Africa investments. So now, having said that, now what the AfCFTA is doing, if you reach the agreement, is addressing what Portia is saying. What Obi is talking about is non-tariff barriers. All those other barriers that are not tariff, the licensing procedures that you are expected to go through, the sanitary and phytosanitary measures you are expected to meet, the technical barriers, so all this cumulatively is what the agreement is seeking to address. So it puts particularly a set of rules that would ease this cross-border movement. That is what trade facilitation is doing in the agreement. There is an annex on trade facilitation that expects you to simplify documents. As a matter of fact, the AfCFTA is going to come up with a single document, easy, transparent, that you can just fill, and then you get your goods across the border. That is precise. All the challenges that they have just mentioned is precisely what the agreement is meant to address. And so now we are saying we have an agreement that is meant to address. We're saying let's show it by the corner and then let's figure out how to address these issues. No, because that's precisely what the agreement has come to do. And then based on that, when the agreement is implemented, when you're talking of implementation, when national governments, that's what implementation means. When national governments look at the agreement, say, okay, these are the sanitary and phytosanitary rules. Okay, so I cannot do this and I cannot do this. And because these goods have been presented in this particular way, I should allow them to cross. And then back to connecting it to infrastructure. Key to the successful implementation of the AfCFTA is customs. Right? So customs processes and procedures, so that you don't wait at one particular border for 4 days before you cross. So what the agreement has provided for is how do we make these custom processes and the procedures, how do we make it seamless? How do we ensure, just like it happens in East Africa, they've been able to achieve that with some of the interventions that went on there, the East African community. I learned that goods from Mombasa ports can travel all the way to Uganda in 1 day, right? So these are the things that the agreement is meant to address, right? So Yes, we have some of the regional economic communities that didn't work so well, but there are some that worked very well. Right. So we cannot say because there's some regional economic communities experience challenges that it defeats the noble purpose of why in the first place they were there. Right. So like for me, particularly what I am in the secretariat to do is to see how we can implement the custom related annexes, which is the customs cooperation, because you need customs talking to one another. You need customs needing infrastructure, needing infrastructure to be able to talk to one another, right? Because they need infrastructure to do, digital infrastructure to do
and
that.
It's digital,
right?
And it's digital.
And it's digital. And it's infrastructure, but they need that to be able to do that.
Yeah. And we don't need money
make
actually to
information
build
flow.
it. The interesting thing is that we don't actually need. Yeah.
Obi, I'm giving you 1 minute to say something, and then we have to bring in our guest speaker because I'd be interested to see whose side he's on. So Obi, 1 minute.
So I just want to make sure that all of us are clear. We love the AfCFTA. What we're saying is that I've been on this type of webinars many times. Mm-hmm. It didn't yield results. What we're saying is that let us focus on the things that we can do. For example, the custom communicating with each other is a digital infrastructure, which I can build for free for the entire continent. I'll use my own Kobo money to build it. So now, one of my good friends, when I was a minister of aviation in Nigeria, mentioned that they went to Boeing and Airbus to finance planes for different airlines. And they told them actually that the problem you have is not more planes in Nigeria. That the problem you have is that your plane spends 64% of their time on ground instead of air. And why? Because even if you go to an airport in Africa today, even the attendant that needs to book your ticket takes literally like 4 or 5 minutes to attend to one person. And this honestly that has nothing to do with infrastructure. We actually have the infrastructure, but there are other subtle things that we need to do. And I want us to move away. We need to move away to actually solving our problem rather than we don't have the luxury. Like people are struggling every time we are spending this energy talking about big things while we haven't done small things. Like people are struggling, business are struggling. We need to start focusing on the real solution, the how, and what can we do, the small things.
Right now, this is sort of like public sector versus private sector type debate going on. You guys, there's another key point, but before we get to that, so, we're going to hear a lot more from you. Keep those questions coming. I am looking at them, and hopefully I'll be able to pick up maybe 1 or 2 before the end. We have a guest speaker today, and I'd like to introduce him. Kofi Klose is Managing Director, Head of Project Development at AfCFTA. He's joining the conversation. Just going to give a very quick intro. He was named Managing Director, Head of Project Development for AfCFTA on May the 1st, 2017. He's a recognized expert in infrastructure development with a solid track record in structuring and financing private and public private projects in Africa and other emerging markets. Kofi, welcome to the conversation. Before I ask you, the first question I was going to throw at you, I just want to find out whose side you're on here. Perhaps you could comment, particularly as a fund bridging the public and the private sector.
Yes, no, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Didi. Look, I do think that both parties are right. And I will start with what Obi and Portia mentioned. It is true that today, the instruments that we have, the various sub-regional bodies, etc., are not working in the way they should. I myself, being from Togo, experience it all the time. When I want to go to Nigeria, to Ghana, etc., I'm supposed to be able to travel with my identity card, and I get all sorts of hassle. We have businesses in the regions that are indeed suffering from non-tariff barriers that have been there for a while, and no treaty, being the YMU treaty, the ECOWAS treaty, and now with this one, have changed anything. So clearly, there is a change of mentality that needs to happen. Implementation needs to happen, and the incentives have to be put there for the flow of goods and people to be able to transit across. That being said, and that addresses the question of the flow, we have also to address the question of I would say the substance, the goods. Yes, today certain goods, the flow of goods is not great, but which goods are there? Most of these goods are imported goods that come through ports and are basically shipped throughout the whole region or the whole continent. There is a need also for us to have our own goods. And here, the treaty has a great importance in creating a bigger market for manufacturing, for agricultural processing to happen, for all these things to become sizable, to have scale. So here again, we need the treaty to work. So I have to differentiate also looking at Jeff Bezos, one example. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world today. He used digital and logistics to create an empire, Amazon. What does he trade? He trade physical goods. He trades shoes, clothing, etc., etc. So manufacturing, the goods also have to come from Africa. It's not only the digital flow that is necessary. We need also to change the type of goods that are traded and also make sure that the goods that we have are traded with one another. So there is a balance to be had here, pushing for the flow and also making sure that the treaty creates a bigger market that will impact infrastructure and et cetera, et cetera.
Great point there, Kofi. And one thing I wanted to touch on with you really was the issue I pointed at the start, talking about the unequal allocation of resources throughout the funding project cycle. So one of the challenges that infrastructure investors face as this free trade agreement gains momentum, do you think that we could see a more efficient infrastructure funding emerge? And what types of business models could emerge to help finance infrastructure development on the continent?
Yes, so with regard to infrastructure funding, the treaty is not going to change the way infrastructure is funded. Infrastructure is funded through equity and debt, and that equity comes either from foreign or local investors, same as the debt. This never changes. So what the treaty may impact will be the size of the market, the fact that there are provisions in terms of dispute resolutions, etc., the norms and standards that have to be harmonized and will allow goods also to flow in a freer way. So the market size will increase. However, the financing of infrastructure and the way investors view risk is not going to change. Foreign investors will always look at political risk, saying, yeah, if I invest here, especially in infrastructure, for a long period of time, will I be able to recoup my investment without being expropriated? That's one. Two, if I invest and get revenues, will I be able to bring these revenues back to my country if I'm a foreign investor? So issues of foreign currencies, can you convert, can you transfer, etc. Another clear issue is security. The past decade has been quite challenging security-wise within Africa. We've seen certain regions where things were quite okay become quite unstable. Let's look at West Africa, for example, with what is happening. If you look at regional infrastructure going places further out, what does it mean in terms of security and making sure that this infrastructure is secured and can be used? So all these risks remain, and the treaty doesn't change that. So I would say that in terms of financing, their investment climate will be what will ensure that we can leverage the treaty. And good investment climate is what? Is that government allow for clear allocation of risks, that there is protection for the investors, that the rule of law is followed, that you can create a company quickly without being without hassles, and to Obi's point, that the normal things that you have to do as a business person can be done without being challenged frequently.
Thank you so much, Kofi, for sharing your view there. Kofi Klose, Managing Director, Head of Project Development at AfCFTA. So clearly, Demeter, he's not Team Demeter. Obi, he's not on your team. He's right in the middle, and giving us a more balanced perspective there. Thanks so much for joining us. We have another poll coming up, but I believe we're going to have the yes. Okay, here it is. It's come up. I believe you can all see it on your screen. So we're talking, can the free trade area accelerate African private companies' involvement in infrastructure funding? And there you have one of the options. Yes, because it will help them develop a competitive advantage. Yes, but it will be a small scale and targeted project involvement. No, despite the context, funding infrastructures remains risky for most African private sector actors, and only if concrete use cases directly linked with the AfCFTA emerge. So that's another poll for you. Trying to see, we will be moving on to our third key point, but I would like to get a question from the audience, just so, I did say it was going to be interactive, so let's see what we have. And I don't want to waste any more time on this, but let's see, questions. I did ask you to put them in the Q&A section and not the comment section. Why is the private sector, so Christian says, why is the private sector not yet interlocked with the AfCFTA? How is it possible for big private investors to interlock with the AfCFTA? Where and how is this possible? There are absolutely no instruments yet set in place. Demeter, would you like to take that one? Would you like me to read it again, or can you see it under the Q&A section? This is the last, the second to the last one from Christian. Is Demeter there? I know she's there because we can still see her on, but she's on mute. Does anybody else want to tackle that question? I think that really is a question for Demeter. Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think maybe when Demeter comes back on, we'll get her to answer that, but let us move on to the final key point of the day, ladies and gentlemen. We've talked about the free trade area, pointing out that we could potentially see a boost in investment in infrastructure as a result. However, there's been a debate on that, a very interesting one, by the way. We also touched on the digital economy. And the final key point will focus a little more on regional infrastructure funding. We know that Africa's infrastructure gap presents an attractive investment opportunity for development projects. Particularly projects focused on intra-regional transport networks, perhaps. But like we've said, the chances of meeting these potentials are hampered by fundamental challenges limiting the involvement of private sector investors. Is Demeter back on, by the way? Demeter? No, I think we may have lost her there. Okay, I will then move on. Obi, I want to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, you've had recent, experience dealing with investors, raising funds in your business. As you know, there are peculiar challenges or fundamental challenges that limit the involvement of private sector investors on the African continent. Perhaps you could point out some of those for us from your experience.
I think the first one is just data. There is no visibility on what is going on in the continent. So it's very difficult for any person in private sector that is managing critical money to gamble in this ecosystem. So that's the first problem. And I think the best way to solve it is to start doing the small things, right? So that people can have visibility. Today, if I want to launch Kobo in Cameroon, even though it's neighboring country to Nigeria, I have no idea today, right? The size of the market in Cameroon. I don't know how many trucks in Cameroon. I don't know anything whatsoever in Cameroon. Imagine if Cameroon could actually benefit from having Kobo as the supply chain leader there. It can actually connect Nigeria and Cameroon, but I can't launch there because I have no idea what is going on there, right? So I think that that data is the first most important thing we need to do, and it's digital these days. It's actually easier to collate once you prioritize digital. So I think that's some of the things that I would say like we can actually do, and then if we do that in next one, to actually give you an example, the Nigerian Corporate Affairs Commission went digital during COVID. Like in the past, like 4 months, like it was shut down for about 6 weeks and it went digital. Today, you can do everything about registering a company in Nigeria online. And it's so fast. It's so fast. So if Nigeria wanted to improve ease of doing business, one of it is just like what they just did with the vice president championed. And today, like you can actually make that progress, right? And it was digital, right? So I think that these are some of the easy things we can actually knock out that doesn't require anything.
Portia, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well. So from a more funding perspective and the issues or challenges that we face when it comes to infrastructure funding.
I mean, more before you get, I mean, we're almost sort of like we're talking around in circles. I think Kofi was on the mark as well, is that unfortunately there's no magic that pays for infrastructure, you guys. You either, if you are a company, you either have your equity check, and frankly, no matter how much business you do, they still ask for it. And Transnet, we're quite big, but we still have to raise our own equity check. Is your equity check. And then you need to have a user pay system where there's a clear collection of the revenue. And actually, we do have to take a lot more control of the designs of the infrastructure that we require. It's been always my core argument is that there are more than enough competent Africans all over the world who we should be finding ways and means to attract back home, so that we can have a much greater control over all of these advisory dimensions on some of this infrastructure, and just speak a little bit more fresh truth to each other and not talk in romantic prose about what might be possible. So I do want to go back to Demeter. I really don't want Demeter to walk away thinking that I may be anti-AfT, the free trade agreement. I mean, I spent a lot of my life working in government. Most of it was also in the space of trade. Agree completely. However, it also would be remiss of us to act, because that also is what is the seeds of failure. If we actually don't at the very beginning actually honestly assess the challenges that we have, and then basically use the minimums that we already have. All I'm saying is that this is a fact. Every single one of us have a road that connects one country to the next country. So so the road is not the limitation of the trade, is my simple point. Even if it's taking you 3 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is, man, to move one country to the other, you do move eventually. But what about starting to remove the basic limitations? So the point that everybody will say and said all the time, there's more than enough money that's looking for projects on the continent, and there are not a lot of projects that are fundable. Absolutely true. We've got to figure out how we ensure that we have bankable projects where we are able to collect user fees from the market in one way or the other, so that we can be able to pay for that infrastructure. Most of us on the continent cannot afford to take another white elephant investment where we then end up having the infrastructure, airport, port, whatever, seaport or whatever it might be, and then end up not being able to use it effectively because we haven't completely done the full investment because we ran out of money, or our government guarantees were at the hilt, or we had reached some limit or the other that limited our ability to borrow. All I'm saying, I'm arguing for, is that it's an important treaty. There are a lot of little basic things which, because it's government to government, are hard. The other thing that Kofi should have been raising, was the issue of the fact that you have a West African legal system in parts of ECOWAS, and then you have Nigeria, which is an English legal system. You have East Africa, a different English legal system, in Southern Africa. So if we're not actually dealing with those hard things, is that okay? So what's the legal system? How do you register the company? You still, I mean, we're not getting to deals with the crux of where the challenge is. We already trade with each other. We may not be trading at the level that we'd all like to see, but the argument is that we must have growth and then let the growth be the generator of the revenue so that you can then be able to increase your investment. I mean, I'm looking at lots of these comments that are coming up with people saying that there's investor money. Yeah, we know this. Let your investors come and make an investment, and then they'll arrive here and they'll ask us a question and say, how are you going to pay for this infrastructure? Even when you get a payment holiday of 5 years or whatever it is, eventually 5 years passes and you're going to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? So that's the only thing is agree. It's an important, amazing opportunity. The problem we have is that we've got very little value addition that happens on the continent. So our terms of trade, even between ourselves, and frankly, because most of us mine or we're using extracting petroleum or whatever it might be, we tend to export to third countries and not even necessarily to ourselves. And then in certain instances, if we have refineries, we may buy crude from each other because we don't necessarily always, because our refineries were not built by us, they were built by others who designed the standards of the crude that the refineries we have in Africa must be for crude from other continents. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that we need to do that is essential for us to see a significant and sizable growth in trade between ourselves. So I'm a firm supporter, but I'm also quite realistic about the fact that there's a lot of hard work on the front side that we all need to do. But in the immediate, today, before the meters governments start to agree on customs, how do we make sure that Cobus truck is able to cross the border in the shortest time possible, that we have easy documentation, that the phones that we have are the basis for sharing information, that we start standardizing in the small things, not big things, in the small things, and then from there, grow from there.
All right, Demita, I know you were off and I'd like to bring you in. I'm sure you're smiling. I'm sure you have some comments there or response there. So
yeah, thank you, Didi. Let me say to Portia, no, I was just trying to say if AfCFTA can do good. I didn't want to come across as if you were not. Your points are really well taken because, yeah, when you want to achieve something, you must necessarily start little. All I was just saying is that let us start little. Let us not look at what has not worked. Let us start and ensure that it works, right? So, for what we can do, there will have to be a whole lot of advocacy. There would have to be a whole lot of advocacy for the AfCFTA so that it will not become one of those white elephant projects, right? So that is what all of us are trying to ensure does not happen, right? So first, there will have to be a whole lot of advocacy. AfCFTA is meant to be implemented at 3 levels. The continental level, which is what the Secretariat is pushing, right? At national levels, because governments would have to implement the agreement they signed on to. So, for instance, government will have to remove those tariffs that they say they will remove. Governments would have to eliminate the non-tariff barriers that they have committed to eliminating. Okay, that's just to give you a few examples. So there is implementation at the continental level, there is implementation at the national government level, and there is implementation at the private sector level. It's a 3-pronged approach, but it has to be sustained. There has to be sustained momentum. There has to be continued advocacy. And then we all have to drive the things that need to be driven to give the AfCFTA the desired results. All we're like, if you were talking to His Excellency, the Secretary General, he will tell you that this is Africa's chance. Let us use it. It won't happen overnight. It will happen if we give it sustained momentum. It will happen eventually, not overnight. Industrialization does not happen overnight. AfCFTA will lead to industrialization, but it's not going to happen overnight. AfCFTA will lead to increased competitiveness, but it's not going to happen overnight. We all just have to take the small steps that we need to take. But on the part of government, on the part of the Secretariat, it is really a sustained advocacy for the AfCFTA. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring in Kofi one more time because we'd like to hear from him as well. But before that, I think we should quickly take the results of the poll that that we had just before this key point. So organizers,
Yeah, sorry, Didi. Can I leave? Because I was really actually keeping to the time that I was really. So
yes.
I have to enter another.
Yes,
Another
yes,
session.
of course. Yes, of
Yeah,
course. I mean,
I'm really so sorry.
No
And let me
worries.
thank my Obi. Thank you, Portia, and then Didi, Kofi too. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I have to leave now.
Thanks so much for sharing your view. You know, we've pretty much come to the end anyway, but I would just thank you so much, Demeter.
And I'm available to answer any questions written, right?
Sure. There are a few questions that have come up for you. Great.
Yeah.
I really wish we had more time, but there you go. That, you know, that's the result of the poll. It says yes. It'll help them develop a competitive advantage, and only if concrete use cases directly linked with the AfCFTA emerge. Kofi, I'd like to bring you in just to sort of perhaps maybe have a final point or final takeaway that you'd like our audience to go with. So Kofi, there you are. Let's hear from you.
Yes, thank you, Didi. No, I would like to say that with regards to infrastructure and what needs to happen and financing it, I totally get the point of Obi, Portia. We need to look at what we can do ourselves. And at AfCFTA, we're quite strongly promoters of using African resources, African financing to finance infrastructure. What has happened so far is that most of the resources for infrastructure came from outside, especially when you look at private investment. But we have banks that are quite liquid and don't have enough actually investment to make. We have institutional investors, insurance company, life insurance companies that have resources that they need to invest for long, very long horizons. And we're not tapping these resources to finance infrastructure, which is a long-term asset. So I guess our plea also to government should be that they should liberalize the capital market in a way that allow infrastructure players to tap into a market that not only have the resources, but also is requiring the type of investment that infrastructure provide. So you look at project bonds, you look at infrastructure funds that would provide equity in Africa for Africa projects. So all of these can happen. The resources are there. This is things that we can do right away. And I would like this to happen. And at AfCFTA, we are quite strong promoters of that.
Thank you very much for that comment, Kofi. I wonder if we have 30 seconds just to have one quick comment from Portia and just one final comment from Obi. So take away Portia and a takeaway Obi, 30 seconds. Start with Portia.
So I want to end on the note on which Demeter ended, because in truth, she's quite right. Advocacy is going to be absolutely crucial if we're going to have the free trade agreement deliver value and benefits for all of us. And so it is important that all of us have some faith, support it, and do everything that we can, even in the small little steps, to see improvements going forward. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Portia. And Obi?
Yeah, I think it's important that we don't relax and start talking about big ideas that won't come true. I think what we need to do is to break this thing down and start doing the small, the digital that we already have. How can local people participate in the infrastructure projects? And how do we at least see the regional things, at least make ECOWAS work on a few things? Like, how do we break this big audacious mission that is 10 years, hopefully? I think the goal is for 10 years. How do we start today to do things we can do for the next 6 months? The custom stuff, can we get it done in the next 1 year? That is how we work. You can't build a nation by just creating massive idea. That's not how it works. So how can we break it down and start achieving it? Because every single day we are talking about all these policies, people's life and businesses are being affected, right? It's being affected. So we have to be serious. We don't have luxury that Western world have. We have to be serious when we're on this call and talking about what can work today.
All right, thank you. I think that's a good place to leave it. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, that this is the first of 3 in a webinar series on infrastructure development in Africa in partnership with AfCFTA. The next session will be coming up on July 15th with the title Infrastructure is the African Private Sector, the missing link, or missing dot. On behalf of the Africa CEO Forum, I'd like to thank our panelists today for your insightful conversation. It's always good when we have a debate going on in these panels, when everyone doesn't have the same view. So you completely love that. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to our guest speaker, Kofi. Thank you so much for your presentation, and to our expert, Adedoyin, for your presentation at the start as well. And thank you to everyone for sharing your views with us and for joining in the conversation. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you.